Welcome to Parallax. Parallax, the construction amidst eternal decay. Parallax, the portal to the edge of chaos. Parallax, poem and provocation.
All right, let's go.
All right,
We're awake,
welcome,
we're
Dr.
alive.
Mark. You're doing a course, identifying your unique wound from wounds of desire to wounds of love. And we just finished your last course, which was explosive. So tell us about the course and tell us about this unique wound. What is that?
Okay, we can definitely do that. I just do have to note that I just noticed that you have great hair. You have like a great, like it's, you know what I mean? Have people told you that before?
There are days.
There are days, yeah, and you're having a good hair day here, Andrew. I'm just saying. You know what I mean? Okay, so
It's better than others, yeah.
So
there's days where it sticks on end and it's kind of wiry.
We're having a good day. It's a good day.
Yeah.
So wound is a very big thing. It's a very, very big deal. And, you know, it's interesting. The original Hebrew word for touching is nega, N-E-G-A. Now, touching is not just a physical act, although it's also an important physical act. It's an act of reality fulfilling itself. So if you look at the interior sciences of the Solomon lineage, or if you look at a mathematician like Whitehead, who's talking about the desire of every object, meaning by object he means every occasion of experience, to prehend all prior experience. Right? What that means is, and it's a there's a very deep reading, a more subtle reading of this in the interior sciences of the Solomon lineage, but it lives in the deepest realizations of humanity, is I don't want to be isolated. I want to be touching. I want to be touched by. I remember growing up, there was this is not your cultural reference, but there was a Ma Bell, the telephone commercial in America, which was reach out and touch someone. Right. And of course, there was an entire, late night comedy, set of routines mocking it because we're so afraid to talk about touching. But, and so therefore we exile it to a kind of illicit touching, to a kind of degraded touching, or even when we don't know what to do with self-pleasure, and we call it was he or she touching themselves. Right. So we don't know what to do with touch, but touch is actually central. Whitehead's prehension, right, which is the sense of this interiority of cosmos all the way up and all the way down, where Whitehead is echoing the interior sciences, prehension is best understood as this proto sense of touch. If you read Whitehead carefully, right, there's this proto sense of, I want to reach out and I want to touch. We're most moved in the world when the simulation of ordinary reality stops for a moment and we're touched by something. Wow, that was really touching. What do we mean by that? We mean that we just stepped out of the ordinary and we stepped into the real. So, or we play in French, let's just play with language, right? It's not completely etymologically, I wouldn't publish it, but touché. Wow, I got touched. Right. That's right. And it's like, wow. Right. It's like, so there's this sense of this exclamation point where reality discloses itself. So in the original Hebrew that appears in a number of places, but most actively in a book called the Book of Calling, which is the third book of the five books of Moses, which people call Leviticus, because there's a section about the Levites, but that's not what the book is called. The book is called Vayikra, I will call. And the word Vayikra is V-A-Y-I-K-R-A. Vayikra, I will call. It has a little aleph, which is the first letter as an alpha at the end. So that little aleph is this several thousand-year-old tradition, scribal tradition, that you shouldn't spell out the aleph. The aleph is subtle. Now, what it intends to do is give you a reading of the word without the aleph. So the reading of the word without the aleph is vayikar. It was an accident. Mikra, accidental, right? Meaning there's nothing to be touched by. There's nothing touching, right? It's a series of accidents in a meaningless cosmos. And then the aleph is no, Mirari. There's miracles happening in every moment. Mirari, which means literally in Latin, pay rapt attention, right? We're being touched in every moment. Everything is touching everything else. So the reason that we did this big introduction is because the word in Hebrew for touch is also the word for wound. Wow. It's very profound. Nega, N-E-G-A, means to be wounded, and it means to be touched. Now, that's called a contronym, meaning you have a word and its opposite. So in other words, and Wittgenstein wasn't wrong when he said, it's all in language, but of course it would be wrong to reduce language to incidental. Language is essential. Language is the languages of calling. So what we're saying is that all wounds are wounds of touching, right? My wound is I haven't been able to touch, right? I haven't been touched, right?
Or I have been touched and
or I've been touched in a way that was violated.
It wasn't reciprocated.
Either I was touched or in a number of ways, beautiful. Either I touched and it didn't evoke, right, the exchange, right, that I wanted it to evoke, or I was touched in a way that was violating, or I was touched and, right, but I couldn't feel. And that's what Leonard Cohen, right, your student was talking about, when he says, I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch, right? Or in other words, when everything is lost, there's one way in. Can I touch? And, can I touch means can I bracket the doldrum, the pain, the ennui, George Steiner's word, the kind of the deadness, and I kind of, so touch is very related to desire. My fundamental desire in the Solomon lineage, good readings of Kashmir Shaivism and Hinduism, right, in the best of kind of Magdalenian Christianity, right, in Whiteheadian thought, right, but more earlier in Peirce, right, and he talks about semiotics, is desire is the desire to touch, but it's the desire to touch that which is real, right? So to touch that which is real means there's something that evokes gravitas. I want to touch and be touched. I desire. What's my desire? My desire is to touch. To touch what? To touch value, to touch significance, to touch the value of aliveness, right? To touch, the experience of it mattering, right? I don't want to just touch matter. I want to touch that which codes matter, which is that it matters. And so the wound is the wound, and it's the same word. It's the wounds of desire. When my desire has been wounded, when I can't access and trust my desire, right? When my desire doesn't know exactly what value to reach for, when my desire has been thwarted, when my touch has been rejected or has been unwanted, when I've lost the capacity to touch and to be touched, when I don't feel the desire of reality to imprint its touch upon me, right? It's very visceral. In other words, please.
Oh, well, I'm just thinking about the fact that desire has been demonized. That it has a kind of a double meaning, right? It's like touching is dangerous, and my desires are dangerous, and I have to be careful, and I need to be safe all the time, and all that sort of modern anxiety about touch and about desire, etc. But I was also thinking that desire, I mean, touch has to be intelligent because our desires are sort of, they go in all directions until
Let's
they
go a
are
step at a time,
clarified, right? So
because
this is clarification of desires.
these are related. These are related. No, that's
Okay.
great. That's great, my friends. Let's go slow. So, one, when we moved into modernity, we created appropriately protections around human beings because we realized how significant touch was. But how significant touch was means not only physical touch, but in other words, we wanted to intellectually, emotionally, physically protect human beings so they could individuate into, right, the deepest and most wondrous expressions of themselves. So we didn't allow unwanted touch, right? I needed to actually desire my touch. That's very beautiful. But let's be very careful. But we don't want to exile touch to the physical. So we don't want unwanted touch of the church, which is imposing its doctrine on me. We don't want unwanted touch of aesthetics, which is telling me what I should be attracted to aesthetically. We don't want unwanted touch of psychology, which goes to meld my mind to a particular desire, not of mine, but of the social order. We want actually to be able to access, right, that which we were manifested for. We were manifested, we are fulfillments of a unique intention of cosmos, and cosmos intends us. That's why we're here. Why am I here rather than not here? I'm here because cosmos intended me. What did cosmos intend? For me to incarnate and articulate the unique configuration of desire, which is my unique self, which is my essence. Who am I? I am not merely a social self melded by the crowd. We talked about this last year in Parallax. And I'm not merely a true self who's just a field of awareness. No, I am an irreducible, unique self. But by unique self, we mean I have a unique configuration of desire. And as you pointed out in the second part of your comment, and I need to clarify that. So as I don't want to be confused, I don't want advertising, an entire industry, to rob me of my capacity to access the inward space of meaning where I can clarify the unique desire that is reality being Andrew Sweeny. And when I clarify my unique desire, right, and which I can only do by actually engaging and transforming my wounds of desire. So we'll get to that. I cannot clarify this is the point. This is what this whole course is about. I cannot either personally, tribally, nationally, or globally, all of those levels, I can't clarify my desire. And my clarified desire is the desire of divinity. Because reality desires, that's what reality does. I can't get there. I can't access that. I can't become who I am. I can't give my gift unless I can clarify my unique desire. But to clarify my unique desire, I need to engage the fundamental ways in which my desire and my capacity to desire and my experience of myself as a living field of desire has been wounded. Yeah. Right? When that's been wounded, I literally begin to deaden, right? When advertising hijacks society's capacity to nourish its own unique desires, right? Then society collapses. So the capacity to access the field of desire that lives uniquely in me, as me, and through me, which is evolution's desire moving through me, which is divine desire uniquely incarnate in me, as me, and through me, both personally and collectively, is the purpose of reality.
Okay, question. So
wow, that's big. It's a big frame.
Yeah. Well, I just want to bring it down to
please bring it down.
Something you can understand. For example, when I was a young man, I went and lived in a strict Buddhist monastery for a year with celibacy vows and all of that, pure food. And at that particular monastery, we were told, our Chogyam Trungpa made the joke that a monk has to be horny all the time. In other words, it was stepping out of impulsive mechanical desire to clarify the desire for a certain amount of time before you could go back into the world. So I think people think of these sort of things as repression today because people don't want to be repressed. They don't want to, and they're mistaking impulsivity
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
that's
for desire.
that's
So we need to discipline our desires.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me give you a different word, but
Okay.
discipline's a great word, right? We need to bracket desire, right? If we can't bracket desire, but the reason that we always there's always in the lineage traditions at their best. There's obviously lots of shadow in the lineage traditions, but at their best, the lineage traditions have two kinds of circumscription or two kinds of prohibition. They have absolute prohibition, which is generally rare, and when it happens, it's often or sometimes problematic, but it's more likely that they have partial prohibition. And partial prohibition is really a partial bracketing. So let me bracket the impulsive acting out of desire in order to be able to access my deepest heart's desire.
Yes.
And that's true in all realms, not just in the realm of the sexual, but in the realm of the sensual, which is the basis, for example, of sense making.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to bracket my desire to have an opinion,
yeah,
and not repeat that which I just heard, so I can actually reflect and discern and understand and do sense making, for example, right? Or when I'm playing music. All right, Leonard Cohen works for such a long time to get those verses of Hallelujah clear, right? And he keeps working on them and working them, and he brackets the desire to, let me just get the song out, right? I've got to bracket the desire, right, to get some instant recognition instead of having Chat GPT-4 write these kind of strange, uncanny valley sentences, you know, that actually deaden the insides. Yeah. I've got to do the deep and hard and beautiful work of writing, right, which takes nothing less than everything.
And then sometimes you can write a song in 5 minutes. It's almost like
sometimes you can write a song in 5 minutes,
right?
But you can only write a song in 5 minutes when you've been preparing your whole life.
When you've been preparing your whole life. Yeah, got it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what we're going to do in this 3-week course is something very specific. And so now we'll bring it down from, and the metaframes matter. The metaframes are not academic. They're not abstract. They're where we live. We live with these invisible metaframes, these invisible worldviews, these invisible understandings. So what we just did is we just explicated them. So it's A, reality is desire. 2, I participate in the field of the real. 3, I am desire. 4, the field of the real is constantly manifesting irreducible emergent uniqueness, right? 5, irreducible emergent uniqueness is irreducibly emergent unique configurations of desire. 6, therefore, I am a unique configuration of desire. 7, that is why reality intended and manifested me. 8, to know myself is to know the unique set of allurements, the unique set of desires, right, for the most clarified value, the most clarified beauty, the most clarified aliveness, and then to act, to enact them, both for my own sake and for the sake of the whole, right? So when I want to actually participate in responding to the meta crisis, and let's work together, Andrew, and write with Parallax. So let's write with the Center for World Philosophy and Religion, a great library in order to respond to suffering. That's because that is a fundamental desire that we've clarified, right? It's not a need for food. It's a place where need and desire meet. That's our fundamental desire. And so to be able to evolve my desire, what's my personal desire? What's my tribal desire? What's my human desire? What's my cosmic desire? This is huge. It changes everything. To step into the field of desire, to know what it is, to incarnate it, to let it move through you, to begin to hear the whisperings of clarified desire, everything changes. Now, just last thing, everything changes, but just to get the image. So if everyone, you know, everyone, if you're listening, if you can just plug into an image. Imagine this moment when you were in the throes of your most beautiful desire. But when I say your most beautiful, I mean your most awake, your most pulsing, your most throbbing, your most visceral, your most primal desire, right? When you were completely transfixed and allured, right? And which the fulfillment of your desire was not merely instrumental, right? To get ahead for some other surface reality. It was the be all and end all, right? In other words, it didn't answer the question of the meaning of life. The question fell away. That is what the experience of desire is. And you cannot achieve mental health. You can't achieve fulfillment. You can't achieve joy. You can't actually be a human being in the fullest sense of the word. You can't avoid the pitfalls of depression and anxiety without engaging desire and engaging particularly the ways in which our desire collectively, but more important, personally. So everyone has a unique self, but my unique self is blocked by my unique wound of desire. So we're going to look to identify, to understand desire. To understand desire, remember there's 12 billion years of desire before there's any sex. Then how does desire manifest in the touching of embodiment, but also in the touching of aesthetics and affect and emotion and depth and wonder? But all of that, it's got to become very personal. It's all personal. It's all personal. What's my unique wound? Which is always my unique wound of desire. And maybe as we move towards the end, the end is in the beginning is in the end, meaning that's the original Hebrew word, right? To be wounded and to touch is the same word, because it's always the wound in my ability to touch and be touched. So I'm insanely excited to enter this space. This is the space of kind of the wounded hero, right? We're wounded kings and queens, and we have to talk more deeply about the wounded God. And so that's also going to be part of this conversation. So it's we're in very fresh and critical ground in articulating what it means to be human, what it means for each of us personally, right? And it's a radical consideration. Without it, we can't actually become whole. We can't actually avoid devastation. But that's true both personally, most intimately. And it's also true in terms of the global intimacy disorder, right? So it's like, it's a crazy important time for us to be together. And I so look forward to being with everyone.
Yeah, my question was, I kind of wanted to make a connection between your last course and this course, because the last course ended on this amazing crescendo where we moved, I guess, from theory into mythology in a way. And when you enter the mythological space, or the space of these stories, like you talked about the fall and Adam and Eve's exile from the garden, and the traditional interpretation of that, followed by the more, let's say, enlightened modern interpretation of that, and then this ended in this idea that the snake is God. In other words, the desire itself is divine. Right. And so I thought that was very powerful and a powerful formulation. And I wonder, where do we go from there, and how do we weave that into the next course?
That's it's insanely important and so beautiful, right? I mean, shame is when desire stops short of infinity. Shame is when desire stops short of infinity. And that's one of the key kind of understandings, realizations of both the interior and the exterior sciences. Kind of one, I'm going to say three things with permission, everyone. So that's one. We'll spend, real time on that in this in the coming. We're spending the year on these topics here in Parallax. So that's insanely important. That's one. Two, shame emerges in the book of Genesis in chapter 3, in the Garden of Eden story. Now, the Garden of Eden story is the single best known story mythologically any place in the world. There's not a story that's more recognized than that story in multiple forms. Three, in that story, in the classical reading of it, shame is incepted. And what's shamed is desire. So before the story begins, the last verse in chapter 2 of the book of Genesis, and Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed.
Yeah.
And that's the description of them after this kind of, crescendo of the kind of first sexing, the first human sexing in cosmos. But it's this human sexing that's innocent, that's not wrought with anxiety. And then there's this confrontation with desire. I begin to see myself desiring, which births human consciousness, but also births shame.
Yeah.
Right? There's a sense of shame in relation to my desire. And the classical reading of that Garden of Eden story is, in fact, that desire is a condition of reality that, when it awakens in humanity, deserves to be shamed. Right?
Yeah. It's a punishment. Yeah.
And that results in, the result of that is the fall in the garden, because desire takes us out of alignment with reality, and then we're punished for that fall. But the fall is unavoidable because the desire can never be clarified, can never be vanquished, and actually the state of desire itself, right, is one that actually obfuscates, that confuses, that distorts.
Yeah,
that's the fundamental first position. There's a second position, which is a kind of neoliberal, kind of liberal, Protestant, Jewish, Hindu, whatever, reading of desire of the Garden of Eden, in which desire is not a fallen condition, but desire is an existential choice. And it's part of how we move that choice, as part of becoming human. And those are both very beautiful when we talked about them. And it, by the way, I never say things like this, and I'm not Andrew's marketing agent, but you should go to Parallax and get that course, right? Because it was insanely beautiful. Really, it's one of the most insanely beautiful things we've had the privilege of doing together. So you should actually. So I'm just giving you just a fragrance of it, but I believe, Andrew, people can order it. People can still get it if you want to listen to it. But here's the third approach. The third approach, which is the deeper approach, which is how do you actually reclaim this text at a more profound level, but not by foisting a liberal interpretation on it, by actually understanding the depth of the lineage text in their hidden positions. And I would call that the cosmoerotic humanist, reading of the story. With Zach and myself and Ken, we're trying to articulate with you, Andrew, this new story of value, a global story of value we're calling cosmoerotic humanism. And this third approach, how would we understand the story? So in a word, if you read it very, very closely, you actually realize, and I can't unpack this now, but you actually realize that the text is a deliberate tantric act. It's a tantric text. And in a tantric text, you have two things. You have a non-rejection.
Yeah.
So no one can be read out of the story, including the snake.
Everything is including shame, right? That's
right. Everything is included. Nothing can be read out of the story. Even shame can't be shamed, right? But I want I don't want to go in that direction.
Okay.
Right. I would just for now, right. Non-rejection. The snake can't be fully demonized, right. Everyone's got to be in the story, right. But two, you got to trace things back to their root. What's really happening? And three, this is the third principle of Tantra. Reality is a trickster. So this is a trickster text. And in this trickster text, actually, what appears to be the voice of God is the voice of the snake, or the voice of deception, or the voice of fundamentalist misreadings of reality, right? The voice of God is not actually divine. And what is disguised as the voice of the snake, the nachash, which also means magic, kind of this kind of shamanic magic, right? Nachash, the numerical value of that word, because in Hebrew, every letter has a numerical value. The numerical value of the word nachash, snake, is Mashiach, Messiah. Messiah means the new human, meaning we've moved from what we call homo armor to the new human, homo amor. So the nachash, who actually incarnates desire, is the realization that desire itself is the name of God. Yeah. And that actually the clarification of desire is the name of God. And let me tell you, perhaps
it's an alchemical process of transforming poisons into
it is the
into gold or into
it is, yeah, but yes, and one could use the alchemical analogy, which was of course popular in Renaissance and post-Renaissance, kind of writings. There's lots of reasons why I think it's a limited analogy, but I understand why one would use it. But let me suggest a different suggestion. I'm just going to do this very briefly, and then we'll close. But just to give you an example, the realization that reality at its core is really desire is so fundamental that you actually get that to claim anything else is actually both a violation of my own identity and a violation of reality itself in the most fundamental way. And I want to give you just a very simple example, okay? So let's say, there's a very big question in abiogenesis, right? In other words, how we move from what I call the first Big Bang, right, matter, to the world of life. How does that transition take place? And we don't know a lot. In the last 50 years, it's complex. But one of the things we know is there's a consensus that you need self-replicating catalytic molecules, right, in order to make that jump. And particularly, you need, self-replicating catalytic peptides, right? So you need a certain kind of peptide, right, which is, a certain kind of, polymer of, amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. Now, in order to get these self-replicating catalytic peptides to produce a certain kind of result, right, a certain kind of product, it's called, that will then catalyze the movement into life. In order to get there, you need chemistry. But not only do you need chemistry, you need a very particular sequence of unique chemistries, without which you have no game. Let's stay close with me. And those unique chemistries are not just the system doing what it's doing what we might call ordinary chemical reactions. Yeah. But no, you need actually 15, 20, 25 like long steps of chemistry in which each chemical process is at precise rate, which means speed and intensity, right, of which produces particular products and then downplays other products. And they have to be in the exact right balance. And that needs to happen again and again and again, and each stage being utterly and absolutely unique. The chance of which any of that happening, right, in a materialist cosmos is essentially zero, as Ross Stein has pointed out. Right? But here's the thing, but this is the point I want to make. And this is insane. This is like insane. So what chemistry is, and a unique rate in chemistry, is the fabric and quality of Eros allurement that animates literally the very structure of reality, which is utterly unique. So it's not a mechanical process. We think a chemical process is a mechanical process. It's not. A chemical process means, wow, we have chemistry. When we say we have chemistry, we're not just engaging in superficial metaphor, we're engaging in ontological participation in the field. Now, how do these stages of chemistry happen? So the only way they can happen is if there's a unique intention of cosmos to have a particular, for example, rate, right, which relates to another particular rate, which then slows down and then moves faster and then intensifies, right, and then turns this way and then creates this angle, right, of engagement and then changes the angle and then tries something else. That's not, I just want you to get that. That's not figuratively. This is what's completely missed. It's not figurative. It's not
It's interesting,
metaphor.
Mark, because you sound like Renaissance alchemists.
No,
You
it's
know, because they wanted to talk about material.
yeah,
They didn't want
they
it to
did, and
be
they
metaphor.
got that right.
And
And
then this was early science, and now you're moving into science, you know, which is a
we're
more
now
you're
realizing, but they did it in a well. Let me not do the kind of alchemy modern science conversation now because I can't do it in a minute. But they had a proto intuition of this. That's absolutely right. But what modern science realizes is that actually there is an intentional second by second unique eros unfolding at every moment in cosmos. That's what uniqueness means. And since uniqueness itself is a plotline of reality, but let me just say what that means in the last second. What that means, here's the last second. That means, and this is what I mean when I always say reality is eros for 12 billion years, reality is desire for 12 billion years. Then it discloses as sex. But when it discloses as sex, sex models the erotic. It doesn't exhaust the erotic, meaning sex is just a disclosure, right, of the eros that's animating reality. So if you really want to understand reality itself, not metaphorically,
yeah.
not in some strange, kind of, mystical sense, not in some aberrant sense, you actually have to understand what reality is reality is literally, okay, so two beloveds. So he or she, you can decide who the he's and the she's are, but they approach each other, right? So, I'll do a classical heteronormative kind of, right?
They better not misgender each other, otherwise
Right.
we're
He
in big trouble.
approaches she approaches he, right? And then he moves her hair out of her face, right? He brushes, her brow, he then slowly approaches. Their eyes exchange glances, right? In other words, their eyes lock. Slowly they move towards each other. They begin to kiss. He then intensifies the kiss. She then receives this kiss. She then returns the intensity, right? And then he touches her shoulder and then take that on, go on with that for, let's say, an hour. That is precisely a unique erotic process, right? Which is a unique rate. It's a unique speed, a unique quality of intensity, which generates energy. And energy is the transformative process that's actually moving cosmos, right? So that is the nature of cosmos. That's actually how cosmos works. And that generates a particular set of processes which generate, for example, SRCPs, self-replicating catalytic peptides, right? So that is an erotic process that's happening in the depth of cosmos. And I'm now engaged in a wonderful conversation with enzymologists, right? One particular enzymologist, where I don't have permission to kind of talk about publicly, but I've been working on this for a while, and then I happened across this person's work, and enzymes are the name of God. What an enzyme is an enzyme hyper deepens, hyper exponentializes an erotic process. So an enzyme is a way of entering a biochemical process and making it more intense, more intimate, changing the angle of penetration, changing the angle of reception, changing the order or the sequence of erotic engagements. In other words, not one word we just said. This is where it's shocking. Not one word of this is poetry. Poetry is this erotic poetry is biochemistry, organic chemistry. It's actually what it is. It's not, oh, that's a simile, which is why, Akiva writes in the first century, if we had no wisdom literature, we could learn everything from the Song of Solomon, which is a description of these processes. So when that's wounded, and is when the unique way that desire moves through me, because who am I? I am a product of reality's unique erotic intention. But that's literally the metaphysics of reality. It's the physics of reality. It's the biology of reality. In other words, Andrew Sweeny is not a product of some vague, no. Andrew Sweeny is a product, quite literally, of the unique erotic desire of cosmos to manifest this unique structure, this unique cellular and structure and molecular structure that never existed before, that then has this unique filaments of desire running through him. And when those unique desires are clarified, and then Andrew then becomes an expression of the desire for value of all of reality moving through him uniquely. When you then wound that desire, you're shattered.
Yeah,
so you have to identify, okay, what is my unique wound of desire? Then the transformation of the untransformed wound literally births me into reality. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, I just have an image when you're talking about the temple and the body being a temple, and you mentioned the Song of Solomon, and I was thinking of the Temple of Solomon, and
Yes.
so when Cosmos is singing reality into being, so to speak, the temple is present, and when the temple is shattered, we live in a world of wounding. Metaphorically speaking, I'm not.
That's right. The world of broken vessels is a world of wounding, right?
Yeah.
Right. But the wound's not a mistake. That's
Yeah.
The wound is the intention of reality.
There's the trickster too, right?
It is actually that we are all wounded, and in the life play of identifying the wound, and then in the transformation of the untransformed wound, we become more wonder than we ever could have been. But again, this is not the poetry of reality. The poetry of reality is the ontology of reality. Poetry is the attempt to stretch language into the depths of silence in order to disclose the sounds of silence, which are the ultimate language. So that's what we're going to be doing together in this course. I mean, it's insanely important. I mean, if we actually get what we just said and we don't break down in tears of rapture, then we're actually not recognizing where we are.
Yeah, I'm coming back to what you said about the Messiah as well, being the trickster, and this whole process being a kind of a trick, and the restoration being coming back.
This realization that I can have, yes, Andrew, yes, love, this realization that I can have every place I've been, I needed to be. Right? It's like, and again,
so we never left the Garden of Eden kind of thing. Like it wasn't. We didn't really leave. We just thought we left. It just felt like we left.
Yes, that is profoundly true realization. I want to and at the same time, there's a dimension of that which is profound that can't be realized in this reality. And that recognition is part of engaging that wound, right? In other words, so many people have talked to me about, wow, the hostages came home, right? From Gaza. Well, no, most of them didn't, right? So, well, many of them did. Many of them didn't. But many of those who would have been hostages were slaughtered on October 7th, right? And then that caused Israel, literally, in order to survive, to have to engage in a horrific war in which horrific tragedy, right? So many people were killed in Gaza that should be alive today and killed tragically, right? In the as happened in German cities all over, as the Allies bombed Germany in World War II, where just a horrific set of realities unfolded. And we live in this world of where war is a possibility, and war has bullets, and bullets are these technologies developed to rip into people and rip them apart, right? Yeah. In other words, what does that even mean that exists? So we live in a world in which there's a certain wounding, right, that does eject us from the garden, right? And yet we're always in the garden at the same time. And there's some way, and we got to hold that tension. We've got to hold that paradox. We're always already home, and yet we don't adopt a kind of bypassing spiritual banal, right, view, which allows us to deaden our sensitivity, right, to the intensity, the unbearable intensity of the suffering. And yet at the same time, we recognize the unbearable joy in Eros, right, which is utterly unique, which is the chemistry of cosmos. Cosmos is chemistry in every second, and we live in that in that movement, in that oscillating, in that dialectic, in that beauty, which we can't do without a realization of a larger continuity of consciousness beyond this world.